The bar was loud in the way only soldiers on leave could make it. Not careless loud, relieved loud. The sound of men who had been wound too tight for too long and finally felt the pressure ease just enough to laugh, without checking the exits every 5 seconds. 6 Army Rangers crowded into the corner near the pool table, boots dusty, shoulders still stiff with habit. They didn't look like heroes. They looked like men trying to remember how to be normal. Sergeant Nathan Caldwell sat with his back to the wall without thinking about it. He hated that he still did that. Hated that even on a night off, some part of his brain stayed in country. "You gonna drink that or stare at it?" Ridge asked, nudging Caldwell's beer. Caldwell took a sip. "Just thinking." "That's your first mistake tonight," Ridge grinned. Laughter rolled through the table. The bar, the copper door, was nothing special. Wood-paneled walls. Old flags nailed up by people who liked the idea of war more than the reality. Music low enough that conversations could still feel private. Then Caldwell noticed the silence. Not the bar going quiet. Him going quiet. His eyes had locked onto something before his brain could explain why. She sat alone at the far end of the bar. Not dressed to impress. No makeup worth mentioning. Hair tied back tight like it got in the way of work. She wore a dark jacket despite the warmth inside. Posture straight, controlled. But her eyes... Caldwell felt a chill he hadn't earned. They weren't flirtatious. They weren't curious. They were measuring. Those eyes had watched people die. Ridge followed Caldwell's gaze and whistled softly. "Well, damn." Caldwell didn't respond. Ridge leaned back, confidence already blooming. "I'm gonna say hi." "Don't," Caldwell said. Ridge laughed. "Relax. I'll be polite." "Don't," Caldwell repeated, sharper now. But Ridge was already standing. Caldwell watched him cross the room, watched the way the girl noticed him instantly, without turning her head, without flinching. That bothered him more than anything else. Ridge rested an arm on the bar. "Evening." She didn't answer. He smiled anyway. "Can I buy you a drink?" She finished her sip, set the glass down carefully, and then looked up. Those eyes hit Ridge like cold water. "No," she said. "Just that." Ridge blinked. "No, no," she repeated. Ridge chuckled, trying to keep it light. "Okay, but you should go back to your friends," she said quietly. Ridge leaned closer, ego bruised. "You don't even know me." Her eyes sharpened, not angry, not emotional. "Exactly," she said. "And you don't want to." That finally cracked his smile. "Wow," Ridge scoffed. "That's cold." She leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "It's a warning." Ridge straightened, irritation replacing charm. "About what?" "About thinking you're untouchable." Something in her tone landed wrong. Too calm, too certain. Ridge laughed it off, muttered something under his breath, and walked back to the table. The Rangers erupted. "Shot down. Didn't even try. She thinks she's royalty." Ridge grabbed his beer hard. "She's arrogant." Caldwell didn't laugh. He watched the girl. She didn't look shaken. She didn't look proud. She looked like someone who had avoided a mistake. A minute later, she stood, paid, and headed for the door. As she passed their table, her eyes flicked, briefly, to Caldwell. Not judgment, recognition. And then she was gone. Caldwell exhaled slowly. "That," he said quietly, "wasn't arrogance." Ridge rolled his eyes. "Sure, man." But Caldwell couldn't shake the feeling. Because those eyes? He'd seen them before. On ridgelines. Through scopes. On people who survived when others didn't. 2 weeks later, Afghanistan reminded them what arrogance actually cost. The briefing room smelled like dust and sweat and bad coffee. A satellite image of a small village glowed on the wall. Darkala, the intelligence officer said. Population unknown. Enemy presence confirmed. Caldwell leaned forward. The village sat in a basin. High ground on every side. A perfect killing bowl. Previous unit took 20% casualties. The officer continued. Killed and wounded. Primary threat. Coordinated enemy sniper network. Ridge frowned. Network. Multiple shooters, the officer said. At least 5. Crossfire from elevated positions. They're patient. They wait. The room tightened. That's when the door opened. A new commander stepped in, Captain Jonah Mercer. Hard eyes. No wasted movement. I've read the reports, Mercer said. We're not repeating them. He turned toward the door again. I have support. She entered quietly. Mask on. Gear clean. Movements economical. But the eyes. Caldwell felt his stomach drop. Ridge went pale. That's her, Ridge whispered. From the bar. Mercer gestured. Chief Petty Officer Elena Voss. Sniper. Ridge shook his head. Sir, with respect. Voss's eyes cut to him. Ridge stopped speaking. Mercer didn't raise his voice. She solves your problem. Ridge forced it out. We don't need a babysitter. Voss finally spoke. You can handle it yourselves, she said calmly. Or you can survive. Silence. Caldwell swallowed. Because now he understood. The bar hadn't been a rejection. It had been professional courtesy. The helicopter didn't linger. It never did. One moment the rotors were beating the air into submission, dust swallowing the world in a choking brown storm. And the next, the sound was already pulling away, fading into the mountains like it had never been there at all. Silence rushed in to replace it. Not peace. Exposure. Dark hollow lay below them, pressed into the earth like a wound that refused to close. A cluster of mud brick houses. Narrow alleys. Low walls. And above it all, ridges. 5 of them. Maybe more, depending how you counted the folds of the land. A perfect bowl. A perfect trap. Caldwell felt it immediately. The way his shoulders tightened. The way his eyes were drawn upward, not toward the village but toward the high ground that surrounded it like a jury. Stack up, Mercer ordered quietly. The Rangers moved with discipline born from repetition and fear. Rifles up. Angles checked. Every shadow measured. They'd trained for villages like this. Cleared dozens of them. But this one felt different. Too quiet. No civilians. No dogs. No distant chatter. Even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. Ridge moved beside Caldwell, jaw set. Feels like walking into someone else's plan. Caldwell nodded. Because we are. They crossed the first open stretch. Nothing happened. Then the second. Still nothing. The village center came into view. A small open area with a dry well and a collapsed awning. The kind of place that would have been busy once. The kind of place snipers loved. Caldwell raised his fist. They froze. And that's when the first shot came. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a sharp crack that felt closer than it was. The round punched through a wall behind Caldwell's head, showering him with pulverized adobe. Contact. Everyone dropped at once. The second shot hit one of the Rangers in the thigh. Clean, surgical, disabling without killing. He screamed and went down hard. Then the third. Then the fourth. Different angles. Different rhythms. Multiple shooters. Mercer shouted. 5 directions, just like intel. The air turned hostile. Rounds snapped from rooftops, ridge lines, narrow windows cut into stone. You couldn't tell where to look because everywhere was wrong. Caldwell dragged the wounded Ranger behind a low wall, fingers already slick with blood. Medic, he yelled. The medic moved, then jerked back as a round shattered the wall inches from his face. They're targeting medics, someone shouted. Ridge fired back in anger, rounds kicking up dust on a distant ridge. Ridge, stop, Caldwell barked. You're exposing yourself. Another Ranger screamed, shoulder hit, armor cracked, bone compromised. Panic tried to take root. Not screaming panic. The dangerous kind. The kind that whispered this is how it ends. Mercer keyed his radio. Voss, we're taking heavy fire. Static. A heartbeat passed. Then, I see them. Her voice. Calm. Almost gentle. Caldwell felt something unlock in his chest. You're in position? Mercer demanded. Overwatch established, Voss replied. I count 5 shooters. Confirmed crossfire. Don't move. Ridge swallowed hard. Where the hell is she? Where you can't see her, Voss answered. Another round cracked past Caldwell's ear. How long? Mercer asked. 30 seconds, she said. 30 seconds in a kill zone was a lifetime. The enemy adjusted their fire, sensing fear, pushing it. Bullets stitched the ground. Walls chipped. Dust filled lungs and eyes. Then, one of the snipers stood. Just for a second. That was all Voss needed. Her rifle spoke. One clean crack. The sniper folded backward, tumbling from the rooftop like a discarded coat. Shooter one down, Voss said. No triumph. No urgency. Just information. The second sniper tried to reposition. She tracked him through brush and shadow. Crack. Shooter two. The third fired wildly, panic ruining his discipline. Voss punished the mistake. Shooter three. The fourth and fifth broke at the same time, running along the ridgeline, trying to escape. They didn't make it. 2 shots. 2 bodies collapsing almost in unison. Area clear, Voss said. Move now. Silence rushed back in, loud and disorienting. Caldwell realized his hands were shaking. Ridge stared at the ridgeline, mouth open. That's it. Caldwell shook his head slowly. No, that's just the beginning. They secured the village within the hour. No more sniper fire. No resistance. Just the echo of what almost happened. The wounded were stabilized. Nobody died. That fact alone felt unreal. Voss appeared from the hills like she'd stepped out of the earth itself. Gear dusty, movements economical, rifle slung low. Her mask stayed on, but her eyes were unmistakable. Ridge watched her approach like he was seeing a ghost. You followed us, he said. She stopped in front of Mercer. I was assigned to. Mercer nodded. Good work. She turned to leave. Ridge stepped forward. Back at the bar. I didn't know. She looked at him. I told you not to, she said, and kept walking. Caldwell watched her go, understanding finally settling in his bones. She hadn't been cold. She'd been careful. Because people like her didn't flirt with strangers. They watched them. Night came too quickly. The village darkened, shadows deepening, ridgelines dissolving into black teeth against the sky. The Rangers dug in, setting security, repairing what damage they could. No one believed the enemy was finished. Mercer confirmed it quietly. They'll come back. This village matters. Ridge glanced toward the hills. Then we're staying? Yes. How long? Mercer didn't answer immediately. Until they stop coming, he said. That's when Voss spoke again. They won't stop, she said. They'll change. Caldwell looked at her. How? They'll send infantry, she replied. Angry. Loud. Trying to flush us out. Ridge laughed weakly. Let them. Voss's eyes met his. They'll try to overwhelm you, she said. Numbers instead of precision. Silence fell. Caldwell felt the cold settle deeper. Because snipers could be hunted. Infantry swarms. They buried you alive. The first hour after sunset was the worst. Not because anything happened, because nothing did. Silence in a place like Dark Hollow wasn't empty. It was pressure. It was the sound of someone holding a breath and waiting for you to move first. The Rangers set their perimeter as the sky darkened. Claymore lanes. Interlocking arcs. A machine gun covering the main approach. 2-man teams on rooftops with night vision and tired eyes. Medics distributed, but forced to work from cover because the snipers had already taught them that lesson. Caldwell took a position on a rooftop overlooking the eastern approach. Ridge sat 2 meters to his right, rifle steady, face still carrying a trace of embarrassment from the earlier encounter with Voss. He tried to bury it in professionalism, but Caldwell could see the tension in his jaw. Stop chewing your pride, Caldwell muttered. Ridge didn't look at him. I'm not. Caldwell didn't push it. Below them, Mercer moved through the village like a man counting seconds. He checked every position twice. Spoke in short phrases. Adjusted fields of fire. People trusted him because his calm wasn't a performance. It was a decision. Voss had vanished again. That was her pattern. You didn't keep her close. You couldn't. She was useful because she wasn't where the enemy expected. She hunted from angles you couldn't guess. She moved through the terrain like she'd written it. Caldwell's earpiece crackled. Eyes on, Voss said quietly. Mercer responded immediately. Where are they? West Ridge, Voss replied. Multiple heat signatures. Not in the village. They're staging. Caldwell's stomach tightened. Infantry. Likely, Voss said. And they're not trying to be subtle. Ridge scoffed. Let them come. Voss's voice turned colder. You'll regret that attitude. Ridge fell silent. The first contact came at 23:12. Not gunfire. A shout. A single voice carrying through the darkness from the western edge, amplified by hills and confidence. Words in a language Caldwell didn't know, but the tone needed no translation. Then another shout, closer. Then the barking of a dog. The sound made Caldwell's skin crawl. Dogs turned night into a weapon. A minute later, flares popped. Bright white light burst overhead, washing the village in harsh illumination. Shadows jumped. Walls became sharp again. Every rooftop, every corner, every defensive line became visible. They were trying to steal night from them. They're lighting us up, Ridge hissed. Mercer's voice snapped in the net. Stay under cover. Don't silhouette. Then the enemy opened fire. Not disciplined sniper cracks, rattling automatic bursts from multiple positions outside the village. Suppressing fire. Masking movement. Caldwell returned fire in short bursts, aiming at muzzle flashes, trying to force heads down. The village filled with noise, metallic echoes, crumbling walls, men shouting warnings. They're pushing, someone yelled. Through night vision, Caldwell saw movement. Dozens of shapes sprinting toward the village from the west, weaving between rocks and low walls. They were fast. Too fast. Claymore Lane. Mercer shouted. A ranger triggered the claymore. The explosion tore through the first wave, bodies flipping, dust blooming in the air. But more shapes followed. They stepped over the fallen. They kept moving. Ridge swore under his breath. They don't care how many die. That was the problem. When an enemy stopped counting bodies, your advantage disappeared. The fight became close. Too close. Enemy fighters breached the western edge, pouring into alleys where sightlines collapsed into 10 meters of darkness and sudden muzzle flashes. Rangers shifted to room engagements, firing, retreating, firing again. Every position became temporary. Caldwell saw one of their guys, Kicks, go down in the street, hit in the side. Blood darkened his shirt quickly. The medic moved toward him and immediately took rounds near his feet, forced back behind cover. Medic can't move, someone screamed. Caldwell's lungs tightened. This was what the snipers had done earlier, dictate movement. Now infantry was doing it with sheer volume. Mercer's voice came sharp. Hold. Don't chase them. Keep them in the lanes. But the enemy wasn't staying in lanes. They were crawling through gaps, climbing walls, cutting through courtyards. They were trying to get to the command element. To Mercer. Caldwell saw it too late. A small enemy element, 3 men, broke through a side alley, cutting straight toward the central building where Mercer had set his temporary command point. They're going for Mercer, Caldwell shouted. Ridge swung his rifle, firing down the alley, dropping one of them. The other 2 kept moving. Too close. Too fast. Caldwell started to stand to get a better angle. And that's when his rooftop exploded. Not from a direct hit, but from an RPG striking the wall beneath them. The blast threw Caldwell backward, slamming him into the roof with enough force to steal air. Ridge hit the ground beside him, coughing dust, eyes wide. Caldwell's ears rang. Through the ringing, he heard Mercer shout. Then silence. A dangerous kind. Caldwell forced himself up, vision swimming. He looked down into the courtyard. Mercer was on one knee behind a low wall, firing, but the 2 enemy fighters were still closing. One of them raised his rifle, aiming at Mercer's head. Time slowed. Caldwell tried to line up a shot, but his hands were shaking, his lungs still struggling for air. His sight picture wobbled. Ridge fired. Missed. The enemy fighter's rifle steadied. Then, a crack. Not Caldwell's. Not Ridge's. A single, clean shot from somewhere high and invisible. The enemy fighter dropped mid-step, collapsing like his bones had been turned to water. The second enemy fighter froze, stunned, turning his head as if trying to locate the threat. Another crack. He fell too. The courtyard went still for half a second. Then Mercer exhaled hard and got back into the fight. Voss's voice came through the net, calm like she was reading weather. Command element secure. Caldwell felt something loosen in his chest. Ridge stared into the darkness beyond the village, eyes wide. She saved him, Ridge whispered. Caldwell swallowed. She saved all of us. But Voss wasn't finished. Caldwell, she said suddenly, your rooftop is compromised. Move now. How do you move? She repeated, sharper. Caldwell didn't ask again. He grabbed Ridge's vest and dragged him toward the stairwell. Seconds later, rounds shredded the rooftop position they'd been in, punching holes through concrete and sending shards flying. Someone had found their silhouette. Someone had been waiting for them to stay still. They reached the lower floor just as an explosion rocked the building. The enemy was pushing hard now, desperate to break the line before exhaustion broke them first. Caldwell's radio crackled with Mercer's voice. All elements, tighten perimeter. We hold the center. We hold until they bleed out. Then Voss again, quieter. Mercer, she said. They'll stop soon. Mercer's reply was strained. How do you know? They can't sustain this, Voss said. And they're starting to fear the high ground. Fear. That word mattered. Because fear made enemies sloppy. And sloppy enemies died. At 0300, the push finally faltered. Not because the enemy ran out of bodies, because they ran out of certainty. Every time they tried to coordinate, a leader dropped. Every time a machine gun set up, the gunner was erased. Every time someone stood too tall, too confident, they disappeared into dust. They began pulling back. Reluctantly, angrily, but pulling back. The village didn't go quiet again. Not immediately. There were still sporadic shots, still movement, still tension. But the overwhelming wave had broken. Caldwell slumped against a wall, breathing hard, hands trembling. Ridge sat beside him, face pale. She was right, Ridge murmured. Caldwell didn't answer. Because he was thinking about something else. He was thinking about the bar. About the girl who had looked at Ridge like she saw the end of a story he didn't understand. And he was thinking, maybe she hadn't warned them away because she was arrogant. Maybe she had warned them away because she knew what her presence meant. Because wherever she went, people bled, people died. And sometimes, if she did her job right, people lived. Dawn didn't bring comfort. It brought color, enough to see the damage clearly, enough to count the cost. Dark Hollow looked hollow in the early light. Walls were shattered. Smoke drifted from burned doorways. The ground was littered with brass and broken glass. Somewhere a dog barked once and then went silent again, as if even it understood this was not a place for noise. The Rangers moved like exhausted machines, checking positions, reloading, patching wounds with hands that were finally starting to shake now that the immediate threat had eased. Medics worked openly again, no longer pinned by snipers, moving between the wounded with faster steps. Kix was alive, barely, but alive. They'd gotten a pressure bandage on him and kept him breathing through the night. Two others had minor injuries, shrapnel, burns, bruises. Nothing catastrophic. It felt like a miracle. Or a trick. Caldwell stood near the village edge, staring up at the ridgeline. His skin still felt tight with dried sweat and dust. His thoughts were slow, like his mind was wading through mud. Ridge walked up beside him, helmet in hand, face still pale. You think she's still up there? He asked. Caldwell nodded. Yeah. Why doesn't she come down? Caldwell didn't answer. Because he didn't know. And because the question itself felt wrong, as if she belonged to that high ground in the same way clouds belong to the sky. Mercer approached behind them, expression controlled but tired. He'd been hit in the sleeve during the night, a grazing round that tore fabric but didn't touch skin. He wore it like a reminder rather than a wound. Patrols are pulling back, Mercer said. They'll regroup and try again. Or they'll decide the village isn't worth it. Ridge snorted. After last night? They'll try again. Mercer's eyes narrowed. Not if we make them believe there's no point. Caldwell glanced at him. How? Mercer looked up toward the ridge. by letting them think she's not the only thing watching them. Voss didn't come down until mid-morning. When she did, she appeared exactly the way she had before, quiet, dust-covered, rifle slung low, mask still on. She moved through the village like she was walking through someone else's living room, careful not to touch anything. When she reached Mercer's command position, she finally pulled her mask down. The air changed again. Not because she was suddenly pretty, though she was. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was because her face looked older than it should have. Not in years, but in weight. In the way her eyes held distance like it was natural. Mercer nodded once. Good work. Voss didn't accept praise. She just said, they'll try something else. Ridge couldn't hold it in anymore. What else? Voss looked at him. Directly, openly, without the mask as a barrier. Something you won't like, she said. Caldwell stepped forward. Tell us. Voss's eyes flicked over the village. Over rooftops. Over broken windows. Over the basin. Then she said the words that made everyone's stomach drop. They'll use civilians. Silence. Ridge's jaw tightened. There are no civilians here. Voss didn't blink. Not now. Mercer's voice went cold. They'll bring them. Voss nodded once. And they'll bring them to the high ground. They'll force you to hold fire while they move shooters into position behind them. Caldwell felt something hard settle in his chest. That was the kind of evil you couldn't shoot quickly. Ridge shook his head, anger rising. We'll stop them before. Voss cut him off. You won't see it until it's already happening. Ridge stared at her. How do you know? Voss's eyes didn't soften. Because I've seen it before. The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was the sound of people realizing the war wasn't just bullets. It was decisions. Later, Caldwell found her alone near the dry well in the village center, sitting on a broken stone ledge with her rifle across her lap, like it was a pet she didn't trust anyone else to touch. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. You warned him, Caldwell said quietly. Voss didn't look up. Who? Ridge. At the bar. Her eyes flicked toward him. Caldwell continued, voice steady. You weren't arrogant. You were trying to keep distance. Voss's jaw tightened. Distance keeps people alive. That's not true, Caldwell said. Distance keeps you alive. Voss looked away for a moment. Her gaze went to the hills. I don't do bars, she said quietly. I don't do small talk. I don't do attachments. Caldwell waited. Voss's voice dropped lower. When people get close, they get hurt. Caldwell felt the weight behind the words. Because of you? He asked. Voss's eyes returned to him, unflinching. Because of what happens around me. Caldwell nodded slowly. Darkhala. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. Caldwell exhaled. We're alive because of you. Voss's gaze sharpened. You're alive because you listened when it mattered. Caldwell almost smiled. Not all of us did. Voss's eyes flicked toward Ridge, who was speaking with Mercer nearby, gesturing with anger, frustration, pride. She didn't judge him. She just looked tired. The enemy plan unfolded exactly the way Voss predicted. At 1400, movement appeared in the basin, people, not fighters. A slow line of civilians, herded along the ridge by armed men. Women, a few teenagers. One older man leaning heavily on a stick. They were being marched like shields. Ridge swore under his breath. They actually did it. Mercer's voice was ice. Hold fire. No shots. The Rangers watched, fists tight, rage boiling behind discipline. They could see the enemy fighters behind the civilians, using the bodies as moving cover while they repositioned machine guns and spotters along the high ground. It was brilliant in the ugliest way. The enemy didn't need to win with bullets. They needed to win with morality. Voss stood near Mercer, eyes locked on the ridge through optics. Her voice was quiet. We don't shoot the civilians, she said. We shoot what they can't hide. What's that? Caldwell asked. Voss didn't answer with words. She handed Mercer a small tablet, thermal feed from her drone. On the screen, the civilians were faint heat signatures, cooler, smaller. Behind them, the enemy shooters glowed brighter, rifles hot, bodies tense, clustered. They think they're invisible, Voss said. They're not. Mercer's jaw tightened. But we can't fire through the crowd. Voss's eyes stayed fixed on the thermal. We don't, she said. We wait for separation. Ridge's voice broke. They won't separate. Voss finally looked at him. They will, because they have to breathe. She turned back to the ridge. People using shields always make one mistake, she said calmly. They get comfortable. Seconds passed, then minutes. The civilians were marched to the far ridge line and stopped, forced to kneel. Armed men fanned out behind them, setting up weapons, confident the Rangers would stay pinned by their own restraint. Ridge's hands shook with anger. This is insane. Voss didn't blink. She watched the thermal feed like a doctor watching a heart monitor. Then she said, now. Caldwell didn't understand at first. Then he saw it. One enemy gunner stepping to the side, moving away from the civilians to adjust his belt feed. A gap. Another fighter moved behind a rock, away from the cluster. Another gap. Voss's rifle came up smoothly. Her breathing slowed. The first shot cracked. A gunner collapsed behind the ridge rock, away from civilians. The second shot followed instantly, another shooter dropping as he repositioned, still separated. The enemy panicked, trying to pull closer to the shields again. But panic forced movement. Movement created separation. Separation created targets. Voss worked in silence. 3 shots. 4. Each one timed to gaps, angles, moments when the enemy exposed themselves without placing civilians behind the bullet path. Mercer's voice rose. Engage. Precision only. The Rangers opened fire in controlled bursts, targeting exposed fighters, forcing the enemy to retreat, to abandon the ridge line before their plan became a slaughter. The civilians scattered as soon as the guns went silent, running downhill in terrified waves. The enemy fell back hard, their brilliant plan collapsing into chaos. Ridge stared at Voss, breathing hard. He began, then stopped because he didn't have the words. Voss lowered her rifle. Her eyes looked distant again. Now you understand, she said quietly. Ridge swallowed. Why you warned me? Voss looked at him. Yes, she said. Now you do. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Epic Recon Stories. Here we tell the missions that never made the headlines, the decisions made in silence, and the people who carried them. More stories are coming soon.